Tonight's work session is totally dedicated to the presentation of the proposed 2025 budget. And it's quite the endeavor, as always, especially under these times where revenues and income are a little bit down in certain areas, but up in others. But I'll let Mr. Fearborn explain all of that and how he's balancing things out to get us where we need to go. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, sir. I was kind of contemplating tonight and how the eternal progression of time is a wondrous thing to behold, as my father always used to say. This will be my 38th budget that I participated in. It'll be my 28th budget that I've had a significant role in or actually been the presenter on. Things have changed in the last few years, and just kind of thinking about it. So 3 years ago, I was starting into my presentation and I realized that I didn't have my glasses and I couldn't see. And I think somebody ran out and brought them in to me. Last year, we were right in front of the meeting, and I remembered at least that I didn't have my glasses, so I ran out right before we started. And this year, I wouldn't be able to find my way into the room if I didn't have my glasses on. So things have changed considerably as we've been presenting the budget. There are a lot of challenges in this year's budget. I'll describe it as, before we get started, it is definitely a transition year. So I'll go into some of that as we move along here. So officially, Your Honor, members of the council, the proposed operating budget for fiscal year 2024-2025 is hereby submitted for your consideration. Determination of the annual budget is the most important single endeavor of the City Council, as it impacts the lives of every citizen of Raymore and each member of staff, and most certainly guides our future strategic planning.
Excuse me if I could interrupt you there, Jim. So, Ryan, I know this is your first year with our budget process. Those who have been here for at least a year or maybe more understand that this initial presentation is kind of 30,000 foot. You kind of let it wash over you as Mr. Fearborn goes through this. There might be room in here for some questions tonight, but we really want you to absorb what's being said tonight, to take those things into consideration as you re-review the budget as presented. I forgot to start that off like that. I wanted to, and I apologize.
Thank you, sir. Actually, very important, so thank you very much. And to dovetail off of what the mayor said, as we move forward, we do have the luxury this year of a fifth Monday in September. So it's always kind of a little bit weird. We have this work session and then we've got a month before the next one because of the Labor Day holiday. But we do have the fifth Monday, so we have the luxury of 3 full work sessions if we want to take advantage of that fifth Monday. And then, of course, a 4th work session in between the 2 readings of the budget in October. So a lot of time to really kind of mull this over and come back and generate and churn through the budget as we go on. Final item from the letter, and I'm sure you've all had the opportunity to kind of look through it, but that's kind of mandatory that I say is this budget has been prepared using a modified zero-based budget and target-based budgeting approach. Economic outlook that we're kind of in right now. Again, as I had indicated, we're in very much a transition year here. We are coming off of the landfill fight and the lead up to the landfill fight and how that impacted the budget. We're also dealing with some pretty significant legislative actions that took place last year, and I'll get into those. And so this is the first year that those are impacting us. And we continue to see impacts from older legislation, and I'll get into those as well, relative to items like show me courts and some local issues that have hit us legislatively when we get into some property tax issues. For the economic outlook, really want to touch on very briefly touch on 3 areas. Housing, due to the landfill, again, the transitional nature of this budget, housing is coming back. but it is coming back sluggishly. What we are here, before we can do a development, and let's use Parkside as a perfect example on this, before he can start building houses, he's got to put in infrastructure. So right now, at this point in the budget year, we are dealing with his significant investments in the infrastructure that's going to be associated with that. The roads, 163rd Street, trying to get Sunset punched through all the way from the south, items like that. But big hopes then for either mid-year that we don't want to be counting on from a conservative budget standpoint, and also making sure that it not only extends to the singular and the housing issues, but also to our commercial. Commercial and industrial growth within this budget. As always, the council knows that we budget conservatively, but we are hearing very, very good things on the horizon in both of those areas. There is significant interest that is being expressed at the preliminary level. One particular commercial development coming back again in the transition from the landfill that had been dead, now the discussions are occurring again. Taxes. Sales taxes are going to be projected to end this year and begin next year, very, very steady. And I'll talk about the theories on those and the projections that go into both of those here in a moment. Property taxes, there are different sources that are chipping into our property taxes at this point. Does lead to a little bit of concern that we may see a little bit more being proposed legislatively next year as far as some additional artificial caps that are put on those that we have to deal with at the local level. During the current fiscal year 2024, staff is conservatively projecting that there will be 58 single-family permits and 104 attached residential and 28 commercial building permits issued. So you all are aware, you may remember that for those 2 combined residential permits last year, we had budgeted 138 residential permits combined, so we're slightly over. We're being very conservative this year in budgeting down from that. Again, the sluggish growth, we're looking at 128 units, and that Spire gas, we take into account what people are paying on that, but 128 additional units associated with it. For the proposed fiscal year 2024-25 budget, actual revenues and expenditures are taken into account for fiscal year 2022 and 2023. Just a reminder, I'll get into it in a minute when we get into the detail, but we always have to true up 2023 so we can move forward, start talking about our projections for this year. The amended budgets to date for fiscal year 2024 are also considered in the sheets, and projected revenues and expenditures for fiscal year 2024 are included on your sheets, your summary sheets that you look at. And then the department requested, and what I have changed that to, you see in the last 2 columns of the summary sheets. Any questions? I'll get to the thank yous later. There are a lot of them this year. I want to talk about 2, as we get into the detail, I do want to talk very briefly about 2 kind of overriding issues. If you look at the summary sheets, you will note that in the last 2 years, we have been preparing for 2 significant items, neither of which could be totally predicted, but we knew were coming. The first one was the comp class study and how that was going to impact partial this year, fully next year. And so the council wisely saved back operating revenues over operating expenditures in the last 2 years to build up so that we could pay for that. Well, in each of those 2 years, we had revenues over expenditures. So those went down into available fund balance for those years. You can't spend them in that particular year. You're waiting till they're built up enough. But what we did know was coming was the landfill. And so Happily, by saving those revenues over expenditures in anticipation of what the comp class study was going to do, and you see that fund balance building up, pulled a little bit aside last year in '23 to go ahead and put that into the restricted revenue fund, because we knew that that was the possibility. But you basically see those balances increasing over those years, and then the landfill comes, and we know we're gonna have a settlement on the landfill, and so we see now those balances that had been building, now we're paying on the comp class study, have some other items in here as far as what needs to happen moving forward with that, but we see the available balance go back down to where it had been in previous years, in that between 1 million and 2 million amount, and again, talking about available fund balance, not the restricted fund balance. Any questions on that one? So overall, my direction going into this particular fiscal year changed slightly. I want to talk to you about the philosophy of that. So for many, many years, we have budgeted very conservatively. We took into account every possible expenditure, and we didn't count on unknown revenues to an extreme in that. So every year, the council heard from me, and you're going to hear it again this year. Revenues are projected to be higher because we budgeted conservatively low, and expenses are going to be lower. In this case, for 2023, it was over 300,000 in both of those categories. My direction to all my department heads this year was continue to be conservative, but be realistically high, not way out there. My reasoning for that is every few years, a little more than that for me, you kind of need to true that up. Because if you think about it, if we are budgeting, and I'll use an example, if we have a commodity or a supply budget that every year we've been budgeting conservatively high at $5,000. Because 1 year, 8 years ago, we had a $5,000 budget on that. But every year since then, it's been $2,000 spent out of that. And that becomes a very realistic number of what we're actually spending. This year in that account, I directed that we should be budgeting realistically high. You've been spending an average of $2,000. You've been budgeting $5,000. Let's budget $3,000 to $3,500 in that account. And if you can prove up what's actually there, let's do that, rather than kind of assuming something that you've never had in that account before. We did that for a specific reason, and I'll get to that specific reason in a minute. The other items that came into play are, especially when we're talking about personnel, we always assume every single high amount for a person that would come on new. This year, and that, we rarely hit that, very rarely. So this year, what I directed is, I want, when we're looking at personnel, and especially new personnel, I want us budgeting for the average amount and a little bit higher. We rolled it up slightly, the average amount that we're paying on insurance for those people. Because especially when you're bringing on new people, a lot of times they don't have the most expensive family account because they don't even have families yet. But we're still taking that into account, not going low, not going what it would actually be, but in fact, putting it right at the average. So those were my overarching directions before we even started the budget this year. Any questions on those? Perfect. I will be operating from page 25. I know some of you like to follow along with the wording. Some of you like to use the summary sheet. So we'll be beginning with the general fund, and that's on page 35 of the budget. So again, as I had indicated, first thing that we have to do to get to the fiscal year '25 budget is talk about how we're projecting the fiscal year '24 budget is going to end. And to do that, the same way last year we were projecting '23 to end, now we have to true up '23. And the short form of it is, if you're looking at the summary page, you will note that last year at this time, we thought that the beginning fund balance for 2024 was going to be $5,101,000. You see that up at the top in the first blue column. That amount was actually $5,867,064, and you see that moving forward with council amended and the department projected. How did we go from $5,101,844 to $5,867,000? What I had just said earlier. We had revenues coming in $391,884 higher than projected, and expenses coming in $380,336 lower than expected, and $7,000 higher in transfers out. That led to a difference of $765,220 in that beginning budget amount for the current year that we're in, fiscal year 2024. Questions on that? So now let's talk about where our projections are for this year. So we've got our beginning balance. Revenues are projected to come in $643,089 higher, or 4.9%, than the fiscal year 2024 budget number. What attributes to that? There are some anomalies this year. For the first year, as I discussed earlier, for the first year since I've been presenting to this council, property taxes are expected to come in lower than we had actually budgeted. There is one thing and only one thing that I can attribute this to, because the property taxes are based on what we have traditionally seen in people not paying, and we can tell that by the penalties that they're having to pay on top of that. But the rest of the property tax is kind of set. We've got the water balance test, right? We know how many homes are going to be out there. We know what the actual assessed value is going to be, and we know what the levy is going to be that gets pushed up against that. So the only thing that we can think is that non-payment of taxes is what is attributed to that. Kind of followed up when you kind of dig down into the detail. Penalties are projected, penalties are already this year over the budgeted amount for penalties by a lot. And we're projecting, if that trend continues, and it will, because now we're in the penalty period, that they will actually end up being 39% higher, the penalties on those properties, than last year. So a very significant number, and a trend we're going to want to be watching for sure.
If those property taxes eventually get paid, or they do a tax sale, you know, the county does tax or whatever, do we still get that money, even if it's 2 or 3 years down the road type thing?
Absolutely, along with the penalties, sir.
Do we have any research on what percentage of defaulted property taxes we end up getting paid? I mean, it's like, is it like 50% of the ones that default, or 70%, or, I mean, do we have any idea what that percentage is?
Eventually, it will hit 100%.
It will hit
But
100%.
it has to, otherwise they can't sell their property.
Okay, okay.
Of course, that eventually is an interesting note. Yeah, it could be a decade, especially if they're being protested. Franchise taxes are, I'm still presenting. Franchise taxes are projected to come in $36,281 lower. This is because everything but Evergy, we are collecting less on. And as I've said to the council for the last several years, a significant component of that is everything that we were getting from the wireless companies, that now they have either gone from using the telephone to using data, and we do not collect on data sales. And so a lot of folks have reduced their phone plan, but are increasing their data plan. And of course, the legislature is now cutting us back on the cable franchise fee every single year for the next 4 years. That began last year. And that is a significant number. So franchise taxes are down and property taxes are down. Those are the first two bad pieces of news. Sales taxes are projected to come in 2.83 higher than we budgeted, 133,410. A lot of that is the gasoline prices are up, and we collect sales tax. We don't collect sales tax on gasoline like we do the other sales taxes. It's not, it goes to the state and then gets divided up according to population. So we're still seeing the increase in population from 2020 that went into effect in 2022 for us, paying off for us, for sure, in that particular category. Fees and permits are projected to come in higher than budgeted by 240,058, 37.16. Council is aware we budget conservatively. That 128 homes that I talk about, and no commercial and no industrial coming in. Every single year we see this be higher, but it is one that we always want to budget conservatively, even though it is coming in. This is one that from the revenue standpoint, we're trying to be realistically higher. Court fines are up from budget by 30,660. This increase reflects a continually growing docket. And in both municipal and code enforcement offenses, I will say that we have seen the aggressiveness that we were hoping for by appointing a special prosecutor for code enforcement, sitting 2 down from me here. That has worked out very, very well for us. I think that there is a very consistent and seamless code enforcement going on, so we thank the special prosecutor very much. Miscellaneous revenue is budgeted to be 33,679 higher. The entire increase, I can tell you, is due to interest, the rising interest rate prices. So we'll be also monitoring that real carefully now that it would appear that the Fed thinks that inflation is slowing down and cooling off. But we have to watch that one real carefully as well. Total expenditures for fiscal year 2024 are projected to be $536,143, above the expenditure budget. Just a reminder, I usually get to say that that one's under. This one is planned expenditures that we could not budget for. Again, since March, the comp class study has been in effect, and we've had the landfill payments that have come up. But primarily what you're going to see here is this is all going to be comp class study. A reminder that this past year, the council had over $1 million in revenue over expenditures to pay for this, that you had wisely set aside. Total transfers out to other funds in the '24 budget, current budget, $2,790,000. That entire amount, again, landfill related. So the projected unreserved gross fund balance projected at the end of this current fiscal year is $4,200,740. Again, contributors to it, the budgeted amount, the beginning budget amount, higher than we thought it was going to be. Revenues higher than we thought they were going to be, but expenditures also higher than we thought that they were going to be. Any questions on what we're projecting for the end of '24? And again, on the summary sheet, you see that in the last blue column is everything that I've just now talked about. Perfect. We'll begin fiscal year 2025. Staff is budgeting revenues to come in $1,034,110, or 7.88% higher than the fiscal year 2024 budget amount. And when I am comparing all of these, I try in all cases not to mix and match. It can be very, very tempting to compare to actual. It's more consistent if I'm giving you budget to budget so that from one year to the next, you understand. Property taxes are budgeted to be only $68,109, higher than fiscal year 2024. Three things contribute to that. What I always refer to, because the state refers to it this way, the artificial cap that is placed on real estate, the real estate levy due to the Hancock Amendment in the operating funds. Again, that does not apply to the debt service fund because Hancock does not apply to the debt service fund. The debt service fund is voted on each time we do a bond issue, and that is what is used to pay off those bonds. And we are asking the public in any case to allow us to set the levy in the debt service fund for whatever it takes to pay off those bonds and actually pay the bonds for a 2-year period. We could go higher in that. The council has consistently every year rolled that particular levy back. The second item that is contributing to this lower amount is the new state statute that I talked about with you all last week that has a different calculation for personal property. This actually led to a reduction in the total personal property value against which the levy was being applied of $3,154,265. Again, first for me, that is the very first time that either the real estate or the personal property tax in my 38 years of doing this has actually gone backwards. And then we tried to be very conservative in the budgeting because we have no idea at this early stage how much will be taken off because of the senior tax credit. The levy is calculated, again, artificially with that because the levy is calculated as if we were collecting that amount, and those assessed valuations, if somebody has applied for it and their value, they're going to get a credit as if they were paying on the value when they were 62. But for purposes of calculating the levy, it's as if it was the full price. So we don't know yet until we actually see that. We have an estimate of what it might be, and that's why we're budgeting very conservatively in this amount. Any questions on that?
They didn't roll it back to when people were 62. It just started being freezing it right now.
Right.
So when you said it would
Right.
be, they get a credit back
They get
to
a-
when
they
they were
get a credit
62.
back.
Right now, this year, there's really no credit because it's just being froze at whatever levy it is right now.
But the assessed valuation that we're looking at is the full assessed valuation.
Correct, but it's there right now. They didn't roll it back. Like if you're 70 years old, my understanding was they didn't roll it back to what your assessed valuation was when you were 62. They
No,
just froze
no,
it
you just
right
get
now.
you get the credit
Right.
for the amount that when you were 62, it's there.
Right.
So if when you were 62, it was 100 and it's 150 now, the total, the global, the macro of that is now. But the credit that they will receive will go back to when they were 62. In other words, their property is still valued at the current value. It's kind of like a TIF.
Okay. That's, that's different how that was explained to me by the county. They had said that, so it didn't make an impact on the cities. There wasn't any rollback or credit back to 62. It was just what it is right now today. Like my wife's 69, it wasn't going to go back 62. It just says this is what your assessed valuation will be from this day going forward. So I mean, it
And
was
that's
explained
correct.
to me
In the
different.
micro, your assessed valuation will be considered the 100, not the 150. But the city's calculation is going to be at the 150 for purposes of setting the levy.
Oh, okay, okay.
Anything else on that one? Franchise tax receipts for fiscal year 2025 are budgeted to come in $32,998 lower than they did in 2024. Again, this is totally based on 128 new residents, and the amount in the franchise taxes that we're collecting on that. But that cable amount goes backwards again this year. Any questions on that one? Sales taxes, sales tax receipts for 2025 are budgeted to be $295,993 higher than the fiscal year 2024 budgeted amount. Again, as I had discussed, we don't consider anything that is not built and coming on. Last year this time, we didn't budget for HTO. This year we'll budget for HTO to the best that we possibly can, but things that we know are going to be built, but there's not a shovel in the ground yet, and they're not completely vertical, we do not budget for here because we can't count on them. Fees and permits, again, also based on 128 units. The landfill threat is gone, but as I discussed earlier, we're going to see that sluggish pause or gap before they actually start going vertical in these areas while they're still doing infrastructure. We collect some fees and permits on infrastructure, but it's nothing like once that housing starts to go in. Municipal court for fiscal year 2025 is budgeted to increase by $74,178 over the 2024 budgeted amount. Court continues to recover from the impacts that we had with COVID when basically we didn't have court for a long time. So it's pretty easy to recover from that, but we continue to suffer from the restrictions, the new restrictions that have been put on us over the course of the last 10 years associated with show me courts and certain Senate bills that basically restrict the amount, the people that we can charge and the amounts that we can charge on that. In fact, the mayor came in to me today as he was reviewing the budget, and we were talking about the last 10 years of that, and it certainly, you can see the definite drop in 2022. We used to collect about over 400,000 in this particular account, and it is half of that, still going up. A lot of that does have to do with writing more tickets, of course, too, that came after COVID. But miscellaneous revenues are budgeted to increase by $75,724 over fiscal year 2024. That is attributed to, as you all may or may not know, our dispatch fees that we're allowed to charge to the entities we dispatch for are 5% of that entity's total assessed valuation. They're calculated off that particular formula. So between increased in assessed valuations of the entities that we're doing that for, and obviously interest rates being up, we are budgeting that $75,724 over fiscal year 2024. Talk a little bit about the transfer from the vehicle replacement fund, because this is a little bit of a cautionary tale that I want to tell to the council. As the council is aware, several years ago, we transferred from doing our own VERP to all the way up to the larger vehicles in the city. We use the enterprise leasing. That has been a very successful program for us, but it does lead to a change. Instead of Vehicle A being replaced every 5 years, Vehicle A is replaced when enterprise thinks they can get the most money for it, what they continually call the sweet spot for making that sale. After we do the sale, the city gets a portion of that sale money put back in. Over time, that has led to fund balance in the VERP fund that needs to go back to the funds that were associated with it. In this case, into the general fund, there could be $398,000 transferred back in fund balance. I'm not transferring the entire amount because we still have some vehicles that we're trying to figure out that are traditionally VERPed. And those vehicles are very expensive. It's the big dump trucks and some of the larger vehicles, some equipment. To that end, the general fund is getting a $300,000 transfer into it. The park fund, we're not transferring anything yet because we're still trying to figure out, park fund's a lot of equipment. And the enterprise fund, same way. They've got a lot of equipment versus vehicles. So we're trying to figure out what those schedules are gonna be and how much can actually go back. You may see during the year a budget amendment. But talking about this 300,000, and you see it in the last column here, kind of in the middle of the revenues. The caution is that that is a one-time revenue. It is not a recurring cost revenue, so we have to be very, very careful not to use it on a recurring cost item. It can contribute to, coincidentally, you see at the bottom of the general fund that revenue over transfers is 275, 123, not the exact. And the reason for that is when I get to the expansion item requests, I can talk about some of those expansion item requests are one-time items that I'm approving in there. So when all the calculations come out and those are included in the expense portion of this, then it works out to that 275 that you see there rather than the straight 300. Transfer in from the transportation fund each year for transportation-related costs in the general fund. We do a transfer of $320,000, recommending that that remain, not increase, not decrease. Same thing with stormwater costs. The stormwater department is actually paid for entirely out of the general fund. So a portion of that each year we recommend be transferred in. Transfer from the enterprise fund. We have a number of costs that are enterprise fund related, specifically the ladies who work at the window here, administrative costs, credit card fees for people paying their water bill, et cetera, et cetera. The formula for that is actually on page 244, very detailed formula that we use to make sure from an audit standpoint that you all can see and the auditors can see and true up the actual dollars that are going into there. Then each year, our engineering department, as they have become more skilled, several years ago, they took over what we would outside contract for as far as engineering and oversight and inspection associated with a number of our capital projects. We have a set baseline number of those. Street preservation, we always oversee. Curbs, we always oversee. When we're doing things like the medians, we primarily oversee, not primarily, we oversee those. So this year, that transfer in to pay for those costs is $266,375, or $375. Any questions on the revenues for 2025? So before I get to the expenses, it's important that we remember that our most important expense, sometimes not our number one expense, but our most important expense is our people. And it is important that we be fair and just to our people in what we're paying them, that we be competitive in what we're paying them to make sure that we're getting the quality that we need, and we recognize the challenge that we still are understaffed with our boots on the ground people. But we got to look at it, and we got to do what we can. So we've just completed the compensation classification study and have to look at what we are going to do as far as, a lot of times when you complete them, you do not have the luxury to continue to move forward. Especially, as I had said to the council, the easy part is raising your hand and approving a new salary chart. The tough part is getting people into that salary chart in a fair manner that is internally equitable. And then will we be able to move forward in the next fiscal year? We've been under that and been paying people under that since March 1. And looking at the budget and the revenues that we're going to have, what we didn't have to spend on the salary chart and putting people in, and combining all of that, this particular budget includes improvement to the existing new salary chart that the council approved this year, improvement to that of 2.5%, and then stepping people through on their merit, which is approximately 2.5% to step somebody through. The big issue with that, and the first one you want to make sure you do if you can afford it, is stepping people through. Because otherwise, we placed all of these people at 2 because it was paying them more. If you don't start moving them through, you're going to get a little bit of a log jam and where we talk about internal equity, all of a sudden you've got somebody who's been here for 4 years and they're only one step ahead of somebody who got hired 6 months ago. So you got to get them stepped through if you're going to be internally equitable. Then the improvement to the chart, we already know we improved the chart with the comp class study to get competitive. Described all of that to the council, but if we don't immediately start moving, we get ourselves right back into the problem of our chart being out. And we know that people are looking at our chart. It seems like on the MCMA, the city manager's Missouri side, it felt like the day after you all approved that, I'm seeing 5 people asking who everybody's using for their compensation classification studies. So you know they're going out to bid, everybody's looking. But it's important for us to stay competitive. It's important for us to remember our people and do what we can for them because they're the ones doing the heavy lifting around here. Health insurance. Health insurance is currently budgeted to go up by 15% for medical, dental, and vision care overall. So you all know, and you can see it in here, a 15% increase on the employees' medical would mean anywhere between $1 a month increase and $77.28 per month increase on our existing plans. This is an unknown. The council hears me talk each year about the fact that because we are under 100 lives, we do not get information as quickly as we would like. Ms. Auger and Mr. Murdoch are in heavy negotiations right now, getting initial numbers from, we review against other insurance companies every single year. Our broker is Holmes Murphy. They go out every single year, and after we get the initial pass from our existing insurance carrier, they start looking at the other bigger insurance carriers, what we're seeing from an experience standpoint, and so those preliminary numbers start to trickle in. Unfortunately, they trickle in as we're doing the budget. So I have to, in consultation with Holmes Murphy and Mr. Murdoch and Ms. Auger, I have to come up with a number that I think is going to be conservatively realistic that we will hit. Last year, just so you all know, we budgeted the same 31% or 15%. The first pass we got from Cigna was 31%. And we ended up under the 15 in what we ended up being at. So there's a wide variance there that we have to deal with. We understand it. We wish it was earlier. I would alert the council that, because I've told the management team, there is the possibility that I may look at trying to turn the battleship around with the recognition of how this will impact employees' lives and change our plan year. It's second only to changing your fiscal year as far as turning that thing around in a lagoon. What you have to recognize is there's deductibles involved in a plan year. There's various costs involved with making the change, but every single year we go into this with this unknown of what's going to happen with the insurance. And when you're budgeting a 15% increase on our insurance costs, that's a 15% increase that could be spent elsewhere if we knew something better, and it ends up coming in at 3%. Make sense? Kind of to what I was saying earlier, let's get a realistic expense cost ahead of time.
Are you looking at a plan year are you looking at, excuse me, are you looking at a plan year of like 1 July start rather than what we're doing with our fiscal?
Not sure yet, sir.
Okay.
I've just sicked the folks on that one.
Okay.
Kind of surprised everybody with it. It was just in time to present to the management team and look at everybody, kind of get the wide-eyed look at me. Do you know what this means? But we'll
Something like
we'll
that.
be
That
in
might be an
touch on that one for sure. Loggers, this particular year, the general employee population, our contribution will be going up to 14.1. Our police employee group will be going down to 16.2. Again, as a reminder, we are on L6, which is the 2% multiplier. Final average salary is 36 months versus 60 months. We have no rule of 80. And we are non-contributory, which means the city makes the entire contribution, as opposed to the employee contributing 2, 4, or 6. One of the interesting things with that particular one is, as you know, if you're contributory into the logger system, employee contributory, there's a break on your taxes, obviously, when you actually get into retirement. If you, under our particular one where it's non-contributory, once you retire, even though it's at retirement age, when you start drawing, you are actually paying a higher lug in taxes. One of the items that I would, if things ever got very, very desperate, that would probably be one of the first items that I would be examining, because there's a benefit to the employee, but also a cost savings to the city. Unfortunately, you can kind of look out across the sea of our 100 employees here. If that were to be brought up, and you can kind of tell the age differences, what I always kind of call the gold ring folks, all kind of nod their heads because they understand the whole tax implication thing when they retire, and the titanium ring folks are just kind of nodding their heads no at me. Questions on loggers? Perfect. Staffing. Staffing is budgeted to increase by 1 expansion item request to add, again, the realism that is out there, by 1 police officer position. A police officer position, beginning police officer position, step 1, $96,200 is the cost of the city on that. That police officer position is being funded by all the departments coming together, including the police department, and looking at those office supplies and looking at those and cutting them back to these realistic amounts that we talked about. And I did tell everybody, if you have a legitimate cost that puts you from the 2,500 to the 5,000 where you used to be, just come to me. If it is a legitimate cost that has to be paid, we'll do a budget amendment on it. But we want to be taking it out of the proper account, of course. But we have reached that point where we are having to scrape and churn to get positions. And obviously we need positions in a lot of different departments, but we have to make the hard decisions of where those positions are most needed. And so 1 police officer position is being proposed. The recruitment and retention bonus remains. It has been, we have seen direct results of this. Again, as a reminder to the council, when we hire a new person, it's $2,500 at hiring, $2,500 at their 6-month anniversary. And each 5 years of their employment with us, not where they're at on the chart, each 5 years of their employment with us is a $5,000 bonus. Question on that? Perfect. Getting to the departmental expense notes in the general fund. Just a reminder, as you look down that summary sheet, every single department is higher, even with the cuts I was just now talking about. And the reason every single department is higher, and you see it on all of these, so I don't have to repeat myself as we go down, is we're implementing a comp class study, and then the normal merit increase and improvement to the chart is in there, which is why you see every department higher. And in some cases, with the exception of the ones that I'm going to point out here, in some cases, there are certain other items that are leading to that departmental increase. The,
Compensation is broke out from each of these, it's not all in that administrative budget.
no, each department pays their own personnel. Right.
So that's figured in each one.
Right, right. So in administration, again, you see on there where I say it's the increases associated with the comp class. I promise that's the only one I'll repeat it on. Other items that are actually up in there are contractual increases in insurance and professional services have gone up. In integrated technology systems, in addition to, we are seeing significant increases in the costs of the software that are used by the city. We see those every single year, and in fact, they are substantive enough that every single year I actually ask for and receive a detailed accounting of where all of those are and what is going up. Good example, a lot of our systems here are run by Encode, Tyler Technologies, and those go up every single year, year over year. So that is a significant component of that increase as well. Development services, necessary GIS software maintenance, and one of their expansion item requests that are in here also contribute to it. I have engineering in here because it's a hefty amount, but there's nothing associated other than. Streets, costs associated with street light maintenance. We pay Black & McDonald for a set amount each month to come out and do. You may remember when we took over ownership of the street lights, as part of that contractual deal in taking over the street lights, we had to prove to Evergy that we were actually going to be contracting with somebody for that. It has been a while, and we have a lot more street lights than we had, and they've been good enough to let us get away with that. We have some decorative street lights that are in there, so that amount is going to be going up.
Just a quick question. So on streets, it's an increase or decrease? Increase, yes? Second
And
line says decrease. Yeah, just,
Yes, thank you.
very good.
And it's as those come up, it's kind of interesting as I'm making this presentation, my department heads are always good enough to be texting me when they see one. So a reminder to my department heads, I don't stop to read your text, but thank you very much for bringing me up to date. And you're going to see one here in just a minute too. In finance, in addition to the costs that are associated with credit card processing, continue to be on there, and more people continue to use their credit cards, which is kind of a blessing and a curse for us. In police, obviously our largest department, our largest increase, and other than the norms that I've talked about, the the additional FTE is included in this budget within that department. Transfers from the general fund to the park fund, each year we do $100,000 into there. Last year we increased that to $200,000. And that was for a particular position that we were going to be funding up. We've actually brought that position from Parks, and we'll get to Parks here in a minute, back into the general fund budget within the communications department. Expansion items included in the city manager's budget. Again, the $300,000 able to be absorbed within the budget, some minor items in addition to the police officer. Proofpoint software for IT. Proofpoint software is a security software that is specifically associated and allows us to free ourselves up from using the standardized security software that comes with like a Gmail. They have their own. This is over and above that that goes in. We have had in the past, the second item that's being approved, we've had in the past CrowdStrike software. This is an enhancement to it that allows CrowdStrike to look at our environment and determine kind of on a broader scale if the environment is actually being attacked before it actually hits a specific location within the city. We also wanted to put this one in there because there were a couple of departments that didn't get completely shut down during the recent CrowdStrike shutdown that hit the entire world. So we wanted to make sure that we bought this so those departments could get completely shut down too by our IT department. Trimble Pro Pathfinder, 7,751. For those of you who remember Heather Eisenbarth, she used to do localized GIS she wore a hat and it had an antenna on it and she carried like this thing around. It's gotten a little bit outdated. We don't wear hats anymore. So this is a new GIS for localized GIS finding. Bobcat brush mower speaks for itself for streets. A lot of mowing out there. Page freezer for communications. This kind of goes across several. We have noted that when we get sunshine law requests, they add in to our sunshine law requests anything on social media. While we do an excellent job of being and have good precautions in place to be able to respond to those requests in email and web and items like that, social media haven't been able to do as well because it's kind of been a manual sort of a situation for us. This will actually archive our social media when we get those sunshine law requests so we can include that and be as responsive as possible to them. And then again, the police officer that I've spoken about. Any questions on the expansion items included? Expansion items not included in this budget. Bulk item trash drop event, that is actually not included, not because we can't afford it, but because as we talked it through, it kind of won't work the way we want it to. We're gonna come up with something and we're gonna address it as far as illegal dumping and kind of helping our folks out. We already have, obviously, the once a month, but we'd like to expand on that. We'll be coming back to you with a better program. Court clerk full-time, not included in this budget. These last ones are simply, we can't afford it. The chief actually asked for 3 police officers. We're able to afford 1, 2 at 192,000 are not included. If we had gotten the 3, we would need a vehicle to go with those 3. They got to get around somehow. I actually sent a picture of a bike maybe to the chief if we get somebody approved later on. I actually had the chief on the bike. And a dispatcher position at 86,200. Again, the city manager and the management team have not forgotten what we attempted to do in April. That problem is not going to go away unless we do something proactively to address that problem. With all of this being in place, the fiscal year 2025 budget, not the fiscal year 2024 budget, the ending gross fund balance for 2025 is projected to be $4,475,864. After we hold back 20% according to our code in restricted fund balance, $2,736,433, we end up with available fund balance to the council of $1,739,431. Again, back into that norm where we have been between $1 and $2 million. That amount is available to the council to be spent on items that you'd like to see it spent on. The city manager's admonition each year is to please, if you're considering using those funds, have them be spent on one-time only items. I will be coming back in our next work session on the budget. Council may remember that I talked to you all about making a recommendation to you all to set aside as the beginning portion of that money for streets, to address our streets problem issue that we tried to address in April. So we'll be talking to you about that at that first work session that we get to in a more global sense. Any questions, generalized questions on the general fund? Park fund. The summary of the park fund is on page 177. Each year, if the park board brings me a balanced budget in the parks fund, I present it to the council exactly as it was presented to them for their approval and recommendation, and that is the same with this year. I will tell the council it took a little longer to get there. I'm going to be talking about some challenges that the park fund has seen and realized really since COVID. Primary revenue sources for the park fund are the park levy. Council voted last week and will second read next week. The park levy within this budget is currently budgeted at 10.66 cents per 100 of assessed valuation, which means that for every dollar of levy that is paid by residents and businesses within the city, 8.75 cents goes to the park fund. It's currently projected that this levy will generate $544,894 in 2025, or 24.08 of their budget. Program revenue. Program revenue is currently estimated to be 38.44% of their budget, or $871,245, and transfers into the park fund are currently budgeted at $850,000 for 37.49% of their budget. As is usual in the park fund, it is budgeted for them to receive $100,000 in transfer money from the general fund. And then the change for this year. So during COVID, because the park fund operates as a business, the park fund was the only department and fund that actually lost revenue, if you think about it. And as the council knows, each year in all of the operating funds, beginning fund balance is here, ending fund balance is here. A balanced budget by code, charter, and state statute can be anything that is expenses not exceeding revenues and beginning fund balance. In Raymore, we operate under, it's a balanced budget. You throw out the top and you throw out the bottom and you look at that year's revenues and expenses expenses cannot exceed revenues in that year as far as what we're budgeting for the next year. During COVID, parks started not having that between the lines be a balanced budget. They budgeted at the beginning of the year to have it be a balanced budget, but starting in that year, because they had to shut down, they couldn't make up for it. Every year since then, they have budgeted faithfully within the lines to have revenues exceed expenses. But they've been trying to build back. I'll say this much. They're not doing a bad job. If you look at the second column on page 30, When you see that program revenue at 871,245 or 38.43% of the budget, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about them out there trying to be independent. That 38.43 in 2015, the fiscal year 2015 budget that was presented was 29.3, or I'm sorry, the levy. The 24.08, that levy was 29.3% of their budget. Now it is down by 5%. Interestingly enough, that 5% is the exact same amount that that program revenue is up as a percentage of their budget. So they're building program revenue to try to make themselves self-sustaining. The problem is they've got this hangover of a year that was not a balanced budget. And if you look at the summary sheet, what you see in these past years, while they have budgeted to be able to hit restricted revenue amounts, the 20% required, at the end of the year, they haven't hit that. And it's because they had the bad COVID year that they needed to make up for. So they need the shot in the arm to get themselves so that this particular year we can get out of that cycle and get them into a spot where they are able to hit the 20% reserve and still have some fund balance left over. Does that make sense? So when we received the COVID dollars, the ARPA money that came in, the council set aside that entire $4 million amount to be the seed capital money for a future justice center. And there were a lot of rules that applied to that money in the beginning that all kind of melted away at the end of it. Since then, we have projected at the end of this year, and I think, Ms. Williams, we've actually already done the investment for the current year. We do long-term investments for this money. So based on the investments that have gone in, have been released, and we reinvested, we're projecting that by the end of the year, that $4 million will have earned $637,258 in interest. I would propose to the council and propose to the park board that we release $200,000 of that to the park fund, which was the only fund and department that lost money during COVID, not dipping into the principal amount, just using a portion of the interest earned on that to help the park fund get out of what COVID caused in their fund balance. So you see that within this particular budget.
Mr. Holman has a question.
You made your proposal, is that included as part of the budget as is?
It is, sir.
Oh, thank
Projections 200,000 higher than six. But it says department requested.
Right.
And then city manager proposed is higher.
That's correct, sir.
That's, part of that is that $200,000.
Exactly.
They didn't put it in their budget, but you put it in your budget.
Right. Thank you. Revenues within the parks expenditures are budgeted to increase from 2024 by 64,000, or expenditures by 64,584. Again, the ComClass study. Nice part about expenditure increases over budget in the Parks Fund is they come with revenues. So if we get to make another volleyball team, we get revenue off of that. There were no expansion items included from Parks in this particular budget. They had asked for a part-time Parks and Recreation assistant, but as Mr. Mustine and I went through that, there's actually not a saving. We had hoped that that particular position would create a savings. There's actually not a savings when we look at the overtime that we're currently paying versus the $16,817. Any questions on the Parks Fund? The Enterprise Fund. Again, a reminder to the council, the Enterprise Fund operates entirely on a cost of service method. We try to keep that as tight as possible. We do build into the model that we use each year an amount that does include fund balance and an available fund balance. We have to cover the 20% restricted fund because even though the Enterprise Fund, by its name, is a business fund, we still want to make sure that we're planning for any unforeseens in there to a moderate amount. The fiscal year 2025 budget calls for, as we discussed with the council 2 weeks ago in work session, an increase from 2024 from 654 to 662 in the sewer rates and from 913 to 932 in water. Oh, I'm sorry, reverse those. Water and sewer, for an overall increase in the blended rate of $15.94 per 1,000 gallons. Went over with the council that still places us at the bottom of the list in Cass County as far as what our rates are concerned. Expenditures, it's real simple. We got to buy water, we got to pay for sewer. The water total is budgeted for expenses is $2,723,560, and the sewer rate for Little Blue Valley is $1,740,996, and 44 per connection is going to go to 49 per connection in the Middle Butte Creek Sewer District. And just a reminder, we had told you 2 weeks ago, we will be coming back to you talking about what is going to be happening with Middle Big Creek's bond issue at a future work session. Middle Big Creek will actually be here. Jeff Schnook will be coming in and making that presentation to you all. So each year, as part of the expenses and transfers associated with the Enterprise Fund, we have been doing a $600,000 transfer into the, what we call shorthand, the 3R fund, but it's the Enterprise Capital Maintenance Fund. This year, we have this significant cost that will be in next year's capital budget that the council has approved for us to move forward on the Owen Good maintenance. I told you at that time that I would be more than likely proposing to you all that the transfer that has always been $600,000 be increased as we see more infrastructure and aging infrastructure in the city, that be increased from $600,000 to $750,000. That is included within the proposed budget for this year. Expansion items included in the city manager's budget for the Enterprise Fund is a hydraulic thumb for the Caterpillar. The hydraulic thumb for the Caterpillar allows for, simply put, we can pick up bigger, heavier stuff. So when we're out there pulling things out of the hole that we have just now made with the next item very efficiently, we can pick up bigger chunks of concrete and asphalt and get them out of there quicker and save time, save money. And then the rock hammer for the backhoe is just that. We currently do that by hand. Be much more efficient to be using an automated piece of equipment on the backhoe. Both of these items would then later be included in the VERT fund, those complicated pieces of equipment that we've talked about after the initial purchase, but the initial purchase is actually included within this particular budget. No expansion items were proposed that I did not approve for this one. It was just these two pieces of capital equipment. Questions on the Enterprise Fund? If I could take a pause here before we do the debt service real quick. If you look at the next narrative page, which is page 33, you can see the general fund, the recreation, Parks and Recreation Fund, and the Enterprise Fund listed there. This is the operating budget of the city. So when people ask you, what's the budget of the city? Normally, this is what we talk about as far as the city budget is concerned. We don't go into the debt service fund, we don't go into the capital funds. I'll give that to you in just a minute, though, I hope. So you see the $13,874,664 in the general fund. A lot of folks just want to know about that one. You take the transfers out of that, the general fund budget is $13,682,164. So if somebody is asking that, right there on that page, you can see it. Of the general fund operating budget, and this is not unusual, obviously you can see the police department kind of stands out there. It is 43.11% of the general fund budget. Parks and Recreation, no transfers out, $1,991,334. And then the Enterprise Fund, $9,797,004. When you look at the entire operating budget without transfers between the funds, our operating budget for the city of Raymore is $23,281,362 as it currently stands before any adjustments that the council would make. Two other interesting percentages. So I just now talked about the enterprise fund being all about buying water and paying for sewer. Of the $3,702,760 that you see there for the water expense, 74% of that is paying for water, nothing else. And of the $3,905,104 that you see in the sewer, 75% of that is just paying Middle Big Creek and Little Blue for sewer services. So to say that we are operating efficiently in that fund, in my mind, is an understatement. When only 25% of your expenses are other items that, and there are still things in there that have to be paid for, insurance, et cetera. Debt service fund. Debt service fund is presented on page 251 and page 252 of this budget. The entirety of the debt service payment schedule within the debt service fund for the city is $2,613,000. And then one of the interesting things to get into within that is we have debt margin. And there's always a concern about, are you pushing up on the end of what you're allowed to take out, especially in general obligation debt. So short form of that, as you can see on here, we currently have general debt capacity, general obligation bonds that can be done for anything, of $35,209,666. And we have specific debt capacity of $36,104,848. The reason I bring that up is we have property set aside and have talked about our next general obligation bond being a justice center. So when you're looking at these two amounts, and we're talking about how much a justice center is going to be costing us, very important to be keeping those in mind, and very important to be keeping in mind what the breakdown of that general obligation bond could look like, as far as any of it that could be spilled over into specific debt components of that. So it becomes a more important number. You're out there thinking, okay, well, 35 million is a lot of money, not when you're looking at building a building. So we always want to keep an eye on that. Internal services funds. Vehicle and equipment replacement fund, I discussed at length relative to the 300,000 being transferred back in. We talk about that here. And the restricted revenue fund, again, we talked about the $200,000 that is being moved from there into the Parks Fund if the council approves those. Any questions on those? Any questions as we close out the operating funds and roll into the capital funds? Great. Does the mayor want to take a break, or do you want to go ahead?
How's everybody feel? You want to take a break? Take a 10-minute break? Looks like we're good to go.
Very good, sir. City of Raymore has 10 capital funds. Capital funds can be divided into 3 different sections. We have capital funds that are funded, and this is, my presentation is page 288. And then, of course, behind there are each of the capital funds listed. I'll give you a second to get there. So the 10 capital funds are funded, the revenues into those are in 3 different categories. 4 of the funds are funded by sales tax. That's the Transportation Fund, Capital Improvement Fund, Stormwater Fund, and the Park Sales Tax Fund. 4 of the funds are funded up by fees and permits, the Park Fee in Lieu, the Excise Fund, the Water Connection Fee Fund, and the Sewer Connection Fee Fund. You will note we call it the Excise Fund. I don't know where in history that got misnamed the Excise Tax Fund. It's not a tax, it's a fee. 2 of the funds are from transfers, and that is the Building and Equipment Replacement Fund and the Enterprise Capital Maintenance Fund that we just now talked about. So what gets recommended to you all within this section is the 2009 to 2014 capital improvement program. It's a 5-year program. But next year's, what's actually within this budget is the capital budget for fiscal year 2025, which is the first year of that particular CIP. So each year, I always focus on just the capital fund because tonight we're talking about this budget. Eventually, 3 weeks from now, September 3rd, Planning and Zoning actually, by state statute, has to hear and recommend to you all the CIP, and then that comes to you right behind when you're approving the budget, the first meeting of October. Any questions on that? So what I usually do, as you all will remember, and for the sake of Councilmember Mills, is I simply roll through the projects that are going to be associated with next year's capital budget. So total, we have 27 particular discrete projects for next year for a total of $7,753,857. The sheet that I use to run these down, and I'll refer to the other sheets. This is kind of a little bit of a back and forth on here. I always use the category sheet that's on 293, but that is not the actual fund sheet because we use different funds to actually, Parks has something that's being paid for out of the Capital Improvement Sales Tax Fund. So buildings and grounds, all of these projects are on page 298 and 209 respectively, which is the BERT fund. So running them down, an ongoing project within this particular fund is the server replacement program. Servers are very expensive. We have to get to them on a regular basis. And kind of like the old VERP was, we replace them on a systematic type, so many in a particular year to get to those. The City Hall camera replacement in the southwest corner parking lot back here. This will allow for actually a moving head camera. We did this also in the northeast corner last year. We funded one. That parking lot gets used not just by our police department, but it gets used significantly by citizens doing transactions. in a safe location, people doing, exchanging their children on a Friday night from a custody situation. So we want a camera that is flexible and can pick up that entire parking lot rather than just picking up the mayor when he slips on ice. Door access, I'm going to pick on you again, sir. Door access controls, this particular item at 16,534 calls for a door access control on that particular door. And then as you walk into the eastern half over at Centerview to the eastern meeting room, there is kind of that maintenance room to the right there. There's a lot of very expensive equipment of an IT nature that is in there. That door is always open right now, and people go in who think they know how to control a speaker system, and they don't. So we need to keep them out. We need this door to be locked because we have good access control over here, but with this one unlocked, if somebody forgets to lock the door on the inner side, they're walking in, they can get into the court office, they can walk in on the mayor sitting in his office. It's just not a good situation, so we need to get that particular access tied up. Workstation standardization and modernization, 42,706. I like this one because in the long run, having the standardization will lead to cost savings. It'll allow us to buy items in bulk. We have a number of Renegades that are out there that we kind of buy 3 pieces here and a different 4 pieces here. As far as IT equipment is concerned, this will allow a savings in the long run for us. Debris haul off, we have overtime behind and to the southeast corner of the Public Works property over there. We have a significant spoils pile that has developed over there. It needs to be taken care of, and it needs to be taken care of appropriately so that we have better use of that particular property. No household hazardous waste or hazardous waste of any kind associated with this. It just needs to be gone so that we have better use of the property. Parks. 3 of the parks projects are being paid for or moved and put into here within the parks sales tax fund. I'll address those 3 first, and those are the trails maintenance, the dog park, and the Hawk Ridge Park Plaza. Trails maintenance is ongoing trails maintenance at $150,000, and all of these are on page 338 that you all have. Again, trails maintenance is ongoing trails maintenance, and you all will remember we have funded up Parks Trails to be completely reconstructed. This particular amount is for roadside trails and other trails that need to be addressed that aren't being addressed within that program. And that funding mechanism goes out into other years, as you can see on there. Second item, you'll remember that we have had forever a dog park budgeted and Hawk Ridge Park Plaza budgeted. I'll get into a little bit more of a comprehensive component, but as part of the help that we needed to give to the operating fund for parks, the parks every single year has a transfer from park sales tax. We're proposing that go up this year from $450 to $550. You'll notice that leads to, by moving these in the current year to the out year, we actually have a little over $1 million in park sales tax available fund balance. That's going to get used with an amendment that we'll be bringing to the council during the year. TB Hanna, you'll see in the out year of the park sales tax, there's a $450,000 amount for TB Hanna. That is part 2 of the final TB Hanna project. You remember we've discussed a possible expansion to the west of the TB Hanna experience, if you will. Part one included, and I thought it would not be prudent to have it within the budget at this time, so we've removed it. Part one included certain purchases, and I didn't think it was a good idea to include amounts in a public document that would be associated with purchases that need to be made sometime in the future within there, because they would be negotiated purchases. So Mr. Mustine and I spoke, and we had those removed. The issue with the dog park and the Hawkridge Park Plaza that you see on here is those got moved because they can't be done yet. And we wanted to, that 163rd is not completed yet, and and Sunset is not completed yet. When those get completed, then we will be able to undertake those and fund those out of next year. They were in for this year. We've had to push those a year, primarily because of the negotiations that went on, continue to go on Sunset to acquire that property so we can build the road. Similar, we had this conversation about the signs 2 work sessions ago. Everything kind of got pushed as we waited for Sunset, but we want to make sure that those are in the budget as soon as they possibly can be, once they can actually realistically be done.
So are you saying it's gonna be much more than 530? I'm sorry. You're saying it'll be much more than 530,000 to do the Hawkridge Park Plaza? We're just putting that much into this year's capital?
Not the Hawkridge Park TB Hanna, sir. I was describing more the fund as opposed to these projects. Right now, although it does give us some flexibility when we get to the Hawkridge Plaza project to look at what enhancements over what's already been proposed to the council might like to see in there. And I actually presented that same thing when I was speaking with the park board last Tuesday night about that we know that that is a priority project for this council. And so we have the flexibility within the budget to possibly amend that 530, because there's money in the available fund balance. Right now, the total quote is the 530, though.
Okay, so I mean, but, so what we have in the capital improvement
Would cover-
budget would cover
would
what
cover
we
what
have
you've
planned
seen.
right now. It's
Right.
not just this year, and then we gotta need more next year and more the next year.
Right.
Okay.
Unless the council, at a park board recommendation, would want that project enhanced over what you have already seen.
Okay.
Then, so that's the Hawkridge Park Plaza, the dog park, and the trails maintenance out of the park maintenance fund. Out of the capital improvement sales tax fund on page 328, you see the baseball light electrical panel replacement. Again, in an attempt to help the park sales tax, this was a surprise project that came on us. Probably a lot of discussion about it when we pulled the front of the panels off of the ball field lights over at Recreation Park to do the scoreboards. Those panels are in significant need of upgrade and repair. Again, it kind of hit them. It was a question of whether it would be out of capital improvement sales tax or building and equipment replacement fund. I felt that the capital improvement sales tax could much better bear that than either the park sales tax fund or the building and equipment fund. So it would be my recommendation that that particular parks project come out of the capital improvement tax fund. Sanitary sewer, on pages 350 and 351 are the sanitary sewer inflow and infiltration reduction project, the Owen Good generator transfer switch replacement, and and a portion of the Owen Good force main replacement. And specifically, the 360,000 component of that is coming out of the Enterprise Capital Maintenance Fund on page 350, 351. Sanitary sewer inflow infiltration, we have this in every single year. In a portion of the current year and moving forward into next year, a lot of the I&I work, we're going to be looking at going to the north and east component so that we are prepared for when Middle Big Creek shifts from per connections to a volume method. That will help us when we go on to the volume method with Middle Big Creek by having that done ahead of time. So that's going to be our focus in the future years there.
If I could say something there, sitting on the Little Blue Valley Sewer District Board, I see that there are cities there that don't have as a comprehensive or aggressive inflow and infiltration reduction program going. So when we get these heavy rainfalls, their metering numbers rise significantly, and that's how they're charged back to Little Blue Valley Sewer District by the flow rate. And so if we're able to control that and control that flow rate, we can keep our costs down. So that's what I have seen Raymore be very aggressive at and be out in the forefront of. Because some of these other communities even have more aging infrastructure that they haven't done anything with, and their inflow rate is horrible, their infiltration rate. So anyway, it does help us save money by doing that.
The Owen Good generator transfer switch replacement. So council is aware we are spending a significant amount of money this year on replacing the pumps at Owen Good. We have a little electrical problem down there where it works, but it doesn't work as efficiently as it should, and it will be putting on those brand-new pumps, if we don't do this repair, which has been needed for some time now. If we do not do this repair, it will be putting a very unnecessary strain on brand-new pumps at the Owen Good lift station. So it would be included and recommended within this particular capital budget. And then $360,000 is within that same fund for the Owen Good force main replacement that we talked with you all about. You've approved to be within the budget. The significance of that project can speak to, and I don't think it reflects on this particular budget. I hope not, but Mr. Burke is actually on the page. Actually, I've been informed that 4 times within this particular budget, we have that same picture of a man standing in poo. I don't think it reflects on the budget, but maybe a subtle message being given to me. I don't know. And then, of course, within within Fund 53 on page 346 is the majority of the Owen Good lift station, the sewer capital fund, $700,000 for that particular replacement. Within stormwater, again, stormwater curbs are both a stormwater conveyance method as well as a transportation issue. So each year we do take an amount out of the stormwater fund to pay for the annual curb replacement program. This year that's $212,000. Stormwater culvert rehab. This is again kind of talked with you all about these the deteriorating culverts that we have around the city where we're seeing the sinkage. We're putting $100,000 into that, and that will be an ongoing rehab project within stormwater. And then Broadmoor and Grandshire drainage improvements. Broadmoor, right over here, as it goes across Johnson, and then Grandshire, which is up in Cunningham and Creekmore. They have, and Councilmember Barber is very, very familiar with that one. He is contacted on a regular basis. We have streams that are underground streams that are contributing to, at the curb line and at the sidewalk line, water bubbling up and flowing either in the street or down the sidewalk in both of those locations. And flowing pretty regularly. It is the Grandshire one will actually more than likely be expanded because it's in 5 locations up there. that water bubbles up at the curb line. It is much worse over here. The council who was here, Ward 2, will remember 3 years ago now, we undertook a major project here in Silver Lake to do there on the hill where water was constantly flowing down into Johnson Drive and wet leaves and ice during the winter. Going to be the same sort of a project that we're going to have to do here. On the Grandshire location, we're hoping that if we do a correct fix there, because the underground stream is coming in from the east. Grandshire is the easternmost location for that particular one. We're going to start there, and if we fix it right, we're hoping it takes care of the inner two streets where we're also seeing the same thing there. Question on the stormwater projects. Transportation. So transportation is being paid for out of 3 different funds. The Transportation Fund, obviously 36 on pages 312, 313, and we'll start with those. So there is the annual curb replacement program funded at $674,000 in this particular budget, which, the annual curb replacement program, which is combined with the stormwater amount, so that we're well over $800,000 in curb replacement for this particular year. The annual street preservation program, over $1 million this year. Right-of-way infrastructure projects and repairs, $159,000. And the Edgewater Third road repairs, $615,000. Again, this is approving the budget when we're talking about the curb replacement and we're talking about the street preservation program. You're approving the budget, not the projects yet. We've had a number of discussions about what may need to happen with the projects within that particular funding source. It will be part of a future discussion relative to what needs to happen there and where the council's direction is going to be relative to that particular issue. Edgewater Third road repairs, what you see there is, and I'm actually going to turn to the page just so I can kind of talk about it. So that is actually a real picture of how Lake Crest Circle and Vista Cove have kind of sunk into the third level of hell over there. The only way I can describe this is when we did the borings over there, the underlayment, especially of the circle, was mush. It's kind of built on a water source. So we're going to have to, it's going to be very difficult to do any kind of an interim repair there. And as you can see, for one street, $615,000, because we're going to have to go in there and in the worst spots that are there, we're going to be tearing out, we're going to be having to go down 2 feet in some locations to get to where we need to be to build those locations back up. Because if we don't, that entire circle is going to look just like that picture that you see there. Curb ramp repair and replacements. Again, this one is going to be out of the Capital Improvement Sales Tax Fund 45. It's on page 328. The maintenance of thoroughfare routes, the enterprise or the excise fund, page 322. There is a real possibility that whatever the program that the council eventually approves is, and especially if it has to be the 2-year program, we would be combining all of the funds associated with the curb replacement fund, street preservation fund, right-of-way infrastructure repairs, and the maintenance of thoroughfare routes, all of those would need to be combined for that particular 2-year project that we talked about. All of them would need to be used, and even with that, we would probably be about $60,000 short each of 2 years. Dean Avenue Access Management, $650,000 of that out of the Capital Improvement Tax Fund on page 328, and $500,000 of that out of the Excise Fund on page 322. Again, the council is aware, this is going south from 58 on Dean Avenue, includes a number of enhancements and improvements to that particular item. Primary item of which is a new access point for Walmart when we eliminate the full access point on the north end of that, which is just awful. If you've been up there on a Saturday afternoon, it comes to a complete stop in a number of different directions. Would be putting in a signalized light right there where you can see it on the diagram, which is across from the Lowe's primary access point. Walmart has been very good to work with on this particular item, actually kind of out in front of us. They were quiet for a while, but then when they wanted to get going, they really wanted to get going fast. This also calls for the long-awaited median at Kentucky and 58 in next year's capital budget for $200,000. That again is on page 322. You can see the diagram. It is a full median. It is actually already approved by Belton. You may remember we had some concerns that we would go to them and we would end up with the Westgate situation again. They've actually come to us and they've seen the diagram. We've worked with their Public Works Department, and this has full approval from them, so we're ready to go. Underwater hydrant replacement that we have in each year, we accelerate the price for inflation a little bit each year, funded at $189,357 in the capital budget. All of these are out of the Enterprise Capital Maintenance Fund 54 on page 350 and 351. The original town valve installation program, $74,200. This again is a program to put more valves in over an original town so that we do not have to turn off large swaths of original town when we have a water main break, which seem to be more and more. Again, thank you all if you fund the $750 instead of the $600,000. And then Park Street water line replacement, we found out when we were looking at the hydrants going south from 58 on Park down to Pine, that when we were looking at replacement of hydrants in there, we can't replace the hydrants until we replace the water line because the water line is at the end of its useful life down there. Again, $750,000. Thank you very much. That project is $291,500. Total capital funds or capital projects for next year, $7,753,857. If I could turn your attention finally to within the appendix section, page 358. So this is a very good summary that you could put on the wall of your office of our entire budget at a glance. The same way I talked about the 3 operating funds earlier when I was talking with you all, if you look to the bottom right there, I can say that when you remove transfers, total transfers out, our total budget for the city of Raymore proposed for fiscal year 2025 is $35,128,137. That concludes staff reports, sir.
Where do you see, where's that 35 figure? You've got it written on there, but how did you come to that?
39 minus the 4,590,000, right above it.
It's the total budget minus transfers, because transfers
Roger that.
are within funds.
No. It's correct. You just have to do the math on your own and remove the transfers out amount. Yeah. Or 4.590. 4.5.
4.59.
The line just above it. Go to 39,718. There's a dash and then on 495.
35,000, or 39,718,506 minus 4,590,369.
This column in the bottom, sorry. If I can ask, in this bottom column, right, you've got total expenditures of 39,718,100,000. And then there's the fund balance.
Above it, you see the 4,590,000?
Yeah. Oh,
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about in the bottom
Okay.
corner.
Yes.
Is that, okay. Is that correct from, I'll look at it later.
Are you talking about the available fund balance?
Yes, I guess.
The available fund balance would be the available fund balance after the 20% reserves
Okay.
in the
okay.
operating funds. And then in the capital funds, it's just what's there for available fund balance.
All right, I was just trying to follow where you were going and I lost.
On that available fund balance, other than not putting it towards ongoing expenditures, what limitations do we have on that? I mean, can it be put into some additional capital improvement projects? Can it be, I mean, what are our limitations as a council on what we can do with that money?
Available fund balance should only be used on one-time projects. It cannot be used on recurring cost, especially in the operating funds, or you will be out of available
Understand
fund
that.
balance in a heartbeat. In the capital funds, what you will notice is, while that seems like a lot of money going forward, let me use a good example. Water connection fee. When you go to the available fund balance at the end of the water connection fee, you're limited by two things. You're limited by what you can do with the water connection fee. It has to be on water items, but you're also limited on future strategic planning and capital planning. I used to make the joke, he's not here now, I'm sure he's probably listening. If Mike Krass had his way, there would be a water tower in every driveway in the city so that everybody has the pressure that they need. When we go to a water, so there's over $3 million in that fund right now. When we go to do a water tower, that will be eliminated and then some. We will actually have to go out for revenue bonding. So you kind of have to look at those things. Sewer connection fee fund. We tapped into it on an emergency basis for the Owen Good lift station pipe. 700,000, blink of an eye, coming out of that fund. So we always want to be very, very cautious. And some of those funds, like the park sales tax fund, are always necessarily, they're going to be spending it down as we talked about it. It looks good because there's $1 million sitting in there. We've got projects that aren't actually listed that we will be listing during the year and amending that particular fund as we go forward. So from a planning standpoint, we always want to be cautious. From a use standpoint, we have to be cautious. And from a city manager comfort level, I'll always be very, very cautious with the council as far as using those funds.
So I will tell you that historically, we have, back when I was police chief, we had a council that would oftentimes accelerate capital improvement programs, whether it be curb replacement, street overlay, and would use those funds to do that. We've been a little more conservative of late, well, the last 2 years. Even before that, with COVID, we were very careful in the event that there were emergencies. So for the last 5 or 6 years, we've been pretty careful about what we use that money for. But to answer to your question, yes, you can use those in capital improvement plans to accelerate the things that we might need another 1,000 feet of curbing, more curb cut. I mean, whatever it is that you feel like maybe it's in your ward that you'd like to see happen. We've talked about trails in the past until Mr. Fearborn came up with an excellent plan for trails replacement. We talked about that. So that lighting, I mean, we've done a lot of things, talked about a lot of things, but we've been pretty prudent about what we use that money for. That's the end of the, you have any questions? Mr. Holman?
I was just going to add to your statement, Your Honor. You will remember, I know it was Sonia and Joe will, we also run into, we've had relatively minor, moderate winter weather the last couple of years, but a few years ago, we took a strong hit in, so we almost ran out of salt and we ran out of money to pay. The overtime was a close. We had to rebound that into that the next year by cutting spending. So that's one that I'm certainly cognizant of. You never know what Mother Nature's going to throw at us. So that's one that I always want to save some money back
Yep,
for that
good
kind
point. Yeah.
of purposes as well.
Okay. Hey, Mr. Fearborn, you had something else to add?
Thank you, sir. I would like to close out the night by giving incredible deserved thanks to Ms. Williams. Every single day from February 1 on, she has to deal with me walking into her office because I can't come to this until she comes to conclusions on things. So she has to give me the data that I need to put a budget together. And her advice in that, along with Mr. Murdoch, is just invaluable to me. This year, as I had said earlier, had to go to each of the department heads and ask them to come out of their conservative comfort zone. And when that's coming from me, that's tough, and make some sacrifices that they didn't blink an eye at. And so I want to thank Ms. Williams, I want to thank Mr. Murdoch. When it comes to the capital funds, as you can see in the description in here, there is a capital improvement committee that they prioritize those projects that we're talking about. They not only have to look at the project, the value of the project, they got to do the math. They got to do, and we have come light years from when we used to estimate these projects on the level of sophistication that that committee uses and those people use. Mr. Mustina is on that committee. Mr. Salisbury is on that committee. Mr. Murdoch is on that committee. Even though there's not a formal head, again, Ms. Williams kind of has to be the one to crack the whip on the committee to get all of that in. I have the privilege of presenting a budget that is theirs. And so I thank them all. I thank the entire management team for everything that they put together. One last person, Mr. Mayberry. Unfortunately, Mr. Mayberry, because IT runs through every single one of these departments, he has the unfortunate experience of having to be the first person out of the chute to do the departmental meetings with me. And you've probably all heard my mood during departmental meetings can be very interesting. He's the first person who has to bear the brunt of that. So thanks to you all. Couldn't do it without you. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Sure.
Not budget related.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I had received a call this afternoon, and because I hadn't been involved in those previous meetings, I didn't know if what he was saying was correct or not. But he lives on 195th Street and was a little bit upset because there was 3 big road scrapers, and along with the what you call the trucks, because they're taking over more than the whole road and coming from the east. And he was under the impression that there would be no large, heavy equipment coming from the east there to do that work down there on 195th Street. So I told him did not know, but I would ask that question this evening.
Councilmember, if I might, I'd recommend that be a follow-up conversation perhaps with Mr. Fearborn after the meeting tonight
Okay,
or tomorrow.
Don't know, I'll get you your answer.
okay.
Okay, anything else related to the budget? Mr. Dell, go ahead.
Just a quick comment. Couple things. One, awesome, incredible job to you and your team as usual. I would like to propose that we get some more fun people on that CIP committee, because we used to have fun projects to approve for CIP, and these, in my opinion, are a little boring. I'm just kidding. It's evident that our city's aging, that our city's growing, and because of those things, we're not getting to do quite so many fun things with our CIP money.
We'll try to put a fun slant on them.
Bowling alleys at the same time.
Yeah, there you go. Well, anybody have any other follow-up questions or comments as we move along? It's a wonderfully presented budget again for us to consider, and we appreciate the detail and the hard work that's been done on this. And I was looking at the city sales tax, just to give a little kudos to Lisa over there. She projected in 2024, she budgeted 3.6 million to come in. The projection is 3.63 million. So you're pretty spot on. It's only 25,000 off of $3.5 million sales tax income there. So she does her homework. That's just an example to show you the kind of homework that she has to do on every one of these general fund items to project what their revenue is going to be. So, and then they get to working on how they're going to have to dole that out for expenditures, unfortunately. But anyway, good job for everybody. Anybody have